Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Summer times are difficult for us. We've always, I think, seen that here at Flagstone. We've got people in going various directions, and you never know what you're going to get each Sunday morning. So thank you all for being here. We're in our, fourth week of this Insight study on the name of the church. And so just kind of recapping for those, hopefully you all have been able to be here the past 3 weeks and participate. I think we now have everything up online. Is that right, Jason? Yeah, thumbs up. So everything, in case you haven't been able to be here for each one of the sessions, it's now available on the website. So I definitely encourage you all to go back and I guess you could say participate in those classes, because I think it all is very important. Each week has been very important in kind of building up into what we're talking about today. So just as a quick kind of refresher or reminder, the first topic that we discussed was the history of the churches of Christ, and that actually went 2 weeks. So we had enough content there, enough discussion, and there's enough history there that ended up spanning 2 weeks. And I learned quite a bit going through that. I grew up in the churches of Christ, just like I think most of our shepherds have, and so I actually learned a lot about kind of some earlier happenings and how the name came to be and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought that was very interesting. I encourage you to go back and watch that if you haven't participated in that class. And then the second topic that we covered, which was last week, was church names in the Bible. Again, I thought that was very fascinating. Tom really drove that discussion last week. And just kind of in a nutshell, what was conveyed last week is that there are roughly 25 different names in the Bible that reference the New Testament church. And the one that appears to be the most, quote, official was the Way. That was referenced several times, especially in the book of Acts. And it was, we noted that it was capitalized in the text too. So, there may be something to that. And then really the focus of the church, kind of another key takeaway from last week is that really the focus of the church was just simply to spread the news of Jesus. Who was Jesus? Why did he live? Why did he die? Why was he resurrected? And getting that message out, and how that impacted the old law and all that kind of stuff. And really, that was the purpose. That was the New Testament church, and that's what our purpose is here today, even 2,000 years later. And so, again, and that ties directly to the mission that we have here at Flagstone, right? Reach out and connect and serve. It ties right back to the original purpose, why Jesus came. And so that's what we want to focus on today as we dive into our topic. Our third key topic is, does the name impact the mission? It's a key question, right? Maybe as we entered into this study, maybe some of you thought, well, that wouldn't really matter because this is the only name that we can have for a New Testament church. I mean, no doubt. I think that is a mindset that some have that have attended churches of Christ all their lives. And so, I maybe from the study that we've done here, maybe, that's not exactly what you're thinking at this point. But now we kind of start asking ourselves the question, and I'll put it maybe a little bit of a different way. When we think about the mission, again, of the New Testament church that we have applied here at Flagstone, do we think the name that we have associated with our church, the Flagstone Church of Christ, do we think that it helps bring people in to learn more about Jesus and to connect with Jesus and to this body here, or does it potentially hinder it? That's the question on the table. And so we've got a few different topics or a few different questions we're going to throw out. And as Marshall and I have reviewed this past week, and we've discussed it with the rest of the shepherds, this is going to be a highly interactive session, okay? We hope. That's the intent. You don't want us just giving our own experiences and our own thoughts on the topic. This is really important. And this one of the key reasons that we do the Insights classes is, first of all, dive deep into the Word, maybe like we haven't done before. And then second of all, to have this be a very interactive conversation and really get feedback, because there's a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom, here in these seats. And so definitely, we're going to throw some questions out. We do have a few notes and some color commentating, I guess, if you will. But really would like highly interactive this morning. And you may see me up, so I'm going to apologize to those that are watching the video later on. I'm going to be up and around. I want to be kind of listening and interacting as we're doing this. So, Marshall, anything else you'd like to say as an intro?
Just as you already mentioned, this particular topic, this particular question is getting kind of the heart of why we introduced this topic in the first place. I think Monty talked about it the first week that we were together, and just saying, like, our leadership is just taking the initiative to say, are we doing everything we can to fulfill our mission? Are there things that are keeping us as a church family from fulfilling that mission? And this was one of the questions that we came up with. So I think this particular, like, we've laid some groundwork. I think this particular topic today kind of gets to the heart of that question. What kind of impact, positively or negatively, does the name have on the mission?
And I want to reiterate this, because I think this has been said each week. We didn't answer that question yet, okay? That's the purpose of this study, and that's why we're doing this with you all. We're really kind of exploring this and seeking this together with you all. So let's kind of throw out the first question. And does the name have significance at all? Does it matter? And if so, why does it matter? So think about it. What is the general purposes of having like a common name associated with the churches? And by that, think about it in this way. So our church name is the Church of Christ, right? Then, of course, in this area especially, there's a lot of Baptist churches, there's Methodist churches, there's Assembly of Gods, different things like that. Think about it in that way. So what is the significance of those church names?
It signifies membership in a collective.
Okay.
So you're identifying essentially with a platform.
Identifying with a platform or common set of beliefs, maybe.
Common set of beliefs. Just the fact that you say church identifies a certain set of beliefs.
Okay.
And you're further defining that, refining that
Okay.
by additional actions to add to that name.
Yeah. So Chris has said basically there's kind of these levels. So at first, if it's a church, that tells you something, right? Now, there are churches that don't believe in Jesus, right? And so that's a kind of a high level or first level identifier maybe. Maybe you see temple or something like that in the name, okay? So that gives you some broad general understanding of what these people that would attend and worship here at this church might believe, okay? So then you start taking it down a level and you start getting to some of these different, let's say Christian, different denominations or names. So, yes, sir, Mr. Dave.
There's a big difference that you don't realize till you go in. Do you have instruments or not? Do you have a lunchroom or not?
Okay.
There are even differences within the Church of Christ. That's dramatic.
Yeah. So even though there might be a common name with various churches, there may be variation or significant variation sometimes, even with churches that have the same name on their sign. Mm-hmm.
Had a band.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
with that, if they didn't have a band, it would be just like everything else.
Everything else was the same,
Everything
core beliefs, but this Church of Christ had a band. Okay? Okay. Yes, sir, Mr. Fred.
The Church of Christ to me, has a specific meaning which is different from all the other flavors, if you will.
Church of Christ is distinctly different.
In that we are supposed to be about what is actually written, our best understanding of what is actually written, and not to, as the old rabbis did, extend it and extrapolate and put into it things that we think it should have actually been written.
Right. So Fred says that really the Church of Christ really tries to go back and just stick to the word itself as its core beliefs, right? And so that
I
is...
don't disagree with that at all, but I will say there's other denominations that think they're doing the same thing. We haven't cornered the market on that. We can argue about whether they are or we are, but I'm just saying there's other denominations that assume they have the same principle in mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that is a good point though, because you walk into some churches and there is a written creed or set of beliefs, and oftentimes, to be a member of that church, you kind of have to sign off on that or proclaim, beliefs in that or allegiance to that set of stated beliefs. Okay, and that is something that clearly distinguishes the major denominations. I would say. I think, based on my limited knowledge, they typically do have a written set of specific beliefs, and I even, in some cases, operating practices that they want you to agree to. And there's also distinction between organizational structure. That's one thing that, we see as we research, as we kind of, and we'll get to this in a minute, but if you kind of step out of your own shoes and you approach research as maybe an unchurched person or someone that's not familiar with Church of Christ, it's an interesting exploration or investigation as to what you find. But that's one thing that often comes out as a key call out for Churches of Christ, is that there is no hierarchy or organizational governing structure for the Churches of Christ, that each church is a separate independent body with local leadership. Yes, sir, Jerry. Uh-huh.
Difference, the Catholic's difference, sets the Church of Christ apart. We know that we don't have the instruments and that sort of thing.
Right.
To the unchurched, they really don't know what the difference is. They know there's some
Excellent.
difference.
Excellent point,
They
Jerry.
don't know what the difference is.
That's right. That's right. And I want to dive into that.
We'll do the research like
Yeah.
you're talking about, but most of them are just going to go, well, that one says this.
Right.
Let's go try it out.
I think that's an excellent point. So Jerry said that, people that have maybe grown up in the church or have a Christian background, they probably to some extent understand some differences between the different major denominations, Christian denominations, but oftentimes unchurched people don't really have a clue. They don't know. They know that they probably need to go to a Christian church, potentially, but that may be the extent of it, right? But again, maybe as they go talking to their neighbors or talking to some friends in their network, this whole some of these kind of common shared thoughts or beliefs or understandings of the different major denominations may come to the surface in those conversations. Like they may say something about Baptists, or they may say something about Methodists, just because those are commonly known, especially here in the United States. Let's see what we haven't covered here. So we talked about worship style, and we even talked about, even within a certain denomination or church name, those styles can sometimes vary. But there are probably more common or more prominent worship styles that are associated with each of those different names, I would think, typically. I mean, for people that are in the know, if you tell them you go to a Church of Christ, what do they automatically assume? A cappella worship, right? They usually typically assume no praise team too, also. So we might be a variation in that way. Yeah, Churches of Christ do seem to be introducing that more and more. Core beliefs. Okay, and then there is another one, and this may get us down a rabbit hole, so brace yourself, Marshall.
Yeah, I'm ready.
What about stigmas associated with certain bodies? Does that make sense? You understand what I'm saying? I mean, and we could probably go on and on and on and on, but, some people have experienced things in their younger years, and that sticks with people a long time. And they, how many times they've probably told that story of some encounter that they had, maybe as a child or a teenager or something like that, and how it just propagates. And in fact, their feelings were so hurt, or they were so, they felt so attacked in that situation that they're proclaiming that news louder than they are the news of Jesus sometimes, which is a very unfortunate, sad thing to have happen for Christianity as a whole. Yes, sir, Dave?
By inference, I think you're trying to say Church of Christ 30, 40 years ago, which I was a member of, used to say, a lot of them, if you don't go to our church, you're going to hell.
Right.
Very dogmatic.
Right.
And I've had many of, I'll just say, meetings with shepherds that would say, you can't do that. Why not?
Right.
And that's always been a struggle within the Church of Christ about saying that, and now it angers so many people.
Right.
My statement is, if you feel better at the Baptist church, at least go to church, better than not go to church.
Absolutely.
And you would have shepherds just
Right.
very dogmatic, and that hurts people.
It does, yeah. So just so everybody can hear, so Dave said, he called out that in the Churches of Christ, there is kind of a, 30, 40 year ago, there was kind of this stigma maybe associated with the Churches of Christ being known for the only ones going to heaven. Has anybody ever heard that? Okay. I wasn't expecting that. Okay, so we are acknowledging a potential stigma with the Churches of Christ.
But I think I want to clarify as you come over here, Jerry, this, when you're talking about stigmas, it's not just Church of Christ.
No, no.
Because
Yeah.
people have bitter feelings towards any number
Oh,
of
yes.
denominations based on past experiences, not just us.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to come across on a video for whoever may be watching in the future attacking any other churches. I mean, we've got our own things to deal with here in Churches of Christ. But, I actually have close friends who grew up in different, Southern Baptists and different things like that. And they have very similar stories of things that they experience in those environments, So, Jerry, did you have something? Okay.
The modern, or today's Mormon church says the exact same thing.
Okay.
If you don't go to church here, you're going to heaven.
Okay, so other churches may have a similar.
So yeah, that's not
That's not exclusive to us.
But we were pretty loud.
We've got the market cornered at least at some point. Okay. Chris?
So I actually had a guy that I know whose daughter had been offered a scholarship at Oklahoma Christian. And he goes, hey, I know you're a Church of Christ here. He goes, can we have lunch? Sure. He goes, so tell me, are you guys a cult? And I went, no. What do you mean? And he had just heard so many things about, unless you were baptized in one of our churches, you weren't baptized. If you again, the same thing, you guys believe that you're the only ones going to heaven. There was that stance, yes, at some point. I think as we have matured as a movement, if you want to put it that way, I think as we've really stepped back and looked at it, we realized that we've got our, like you said, we've got our own issues. We have our own challenges. And the big question with him was, is it safe for me to send my daughter to one of your schools?
Yeah.
But
So-
that's even, go ahead, you can repeat.
I was just going to repeat. So what Chris mentioned is that he had someone approach him that knew he was Church of Christ and just very candidly asked if the Church of Christ was a cult.
So,
That hurts my heart a little bit.
but that goes back to the whole stigma thing. That's not even a stigma that he had personally. It was something that got communicated to him, but now he has this stigma. And again, man, we have those things about other denominations too, because of what we've heard, what somebody told us about what those people believe. It's not just happening
Yeah.
to us. We do it to other people too.
Yep. Devin?
Yeah, just building on what Chris says, I think we've created that even today still because it's such a closed network. Most of our Church of Christ sponsors summer camps. If you don't go currently a member of Church of Christ, you can't be an adult staff or work leader. You probably can't teach a Harding if you don't go to a Church of Christ. So
You
there's
definitely
no
can. It's not
stigma.
probably. You definitely can.
It's a closed, we created a closed network. Not that you're Christian and you believe in the Bible this way. It's more of like you have to go to one of these.
Okay, so Devin says that in some cases we kind of box out others so that they can't even get in sometimes in our different, yeah, Mike, real quick. Jordan, I'm coming to you.
I would like to know or recommend to the leadership to, if you really want to know what other people think about Church of Christ, go to other faiths, go to Baptist, go to Methodist, go to other faiths and see what they
Sure.
say about us.
Yeah, so to get a true perspective.
You're reaching outside your group
Right.
to get your true answer of
Yeah.
what the stigma is about Church Church of Christ.
Yeah, so let's take this and run with it, okay? So Mike said we should really be talking to some others outside of Church of Christ to really get a good understanding of what others might think of us, okay? So I want to play on this because that is a key part of some of our notes here. So, you know, we have definitely, and hopefully you've done this all of your lives, but we have definitely been pushing or encouraging everyone here at Flagstone to be reaching out and to be talking with others and to bring people in. And definitely the focus on that is unchurched. I mean, we're not really interested in pulling people from other churches if they have a good, strong faith and they're in alignment with the New Testament church and all that. That's fine. But hopefully you're talking to everyone around you about your faith and about your church and Jesus. And so hopefully you do come across, on occasion, Christians in your network or in public places that do attend other churches and might have perspective. What is the typical response that you get when you say, I attend a Church of Christ? Okay.
To be honest, 95% of the conversations that go down this path are typically with Baptists or somebody else that I'm friends with that have these conversations. I work a lot with the next generation, and I can tell you I haven't had anyone ask me in the last 15 years about it.
Okay.
Like either their parents haven't passed it along to them or they just don't care.
Okay.
Like, I don't, like if we're going after the unchurched, now if we go talk to other churches, I think it's still there from generationally.
Okay, that's good. So David said,
you know, my family history, I've got one side that I was born or raised Church of Christ, and the other side that I probably will never see in heaven because of the Church of Christ. So, you know, I've got it from both sides.
wow, okay.
And so, but with that in mind, these conversations I had a ton in college because all of us were finding our way and determining whether or not, you know, what you just said previously about feeling of if they're doing the right thing, we don't want to drag them from another church, right? Well, how do you get to that point, right? You've got to have conversations with these folks to find out if they're following the Word of God or not. And so that's where a lot of that comes from. And we have our differences of opinion, but maybe they're not biblical.
Okay.
So, but I think a lot of these conversations, anecdotally, for me, come from a past generation and maybe aren't being handed down as much as they were from my grandparents to my parents to me because I have the same feelings that you just mentioned.
So maybe this is more of a generational thing and we're starting to phase out of it?
Anecdotally, in my experience, 100%.
Okay.
We never did get to Jordan's question.
So yeah, so real quick, David says that he feels like maybe that some of the stigma type things that had originated back in a few generations maybe have kind of faded a little bit, and the younger folks these days may not even know about some of those stigmas that are associated with the Church of Christ from the past. Jordan, did you have something?
So this is really good because kind of moving closer to what I was going to say, which is when I have conversations with people, a lot of time it opens up with, you go to church anywhere? And they say no. Well, then that's my unchurched moment, right? Like, but they have experience with church, right? It's not that they're unchurched. Like, to find somebody that's unchurched is very, very small chance. Yeah. They have exposure. And so one of the things that I always go, we'll have a conversation and I'll talk to them, and then they'll say, well, where do you go? And I'll say, well, I go to Flagstone Church of Christ in Bentonville. That's an immediate, it's off, we're done. I don't mean that, so I've stopped, and I say, well, I attend Flagstone in Bentonville. It allows me to continue this conversation, and a lot of times it's far more productive. When I ask people why, like there's a resistance to the Church of Christ, it's one, to Devin's point, of exclusivity. Right? If I don't do this, if I haven't had this, if I, all these things, I can't really be a part of that. It's a stereotype that we are working to overcome. Yes, it's generational, but we've not overcome it.
Okay.
Say I'm Church of Christ, they immediately go.
Okay. So in summary, so Jordan says it's in this area especially, it's kind of rare to find people that are truly unchurched, that at least don't have some exposure to church, Christian churches. And then oftentimes, more times than not, when he mentions that he attends Flagstone Church of Christ, the conversation comes to a screeching halt. How many of you have experienced that when you're,
My question on that is, how, of these folks that have that much biblical knowledge, are they truly unchurched?
It's not that they don't have biblical knowledge of what they know what the world has told them about Church of Christ.
Right.
Whether we like that or not, we have to overcome it.
Sure,
If we don't,
what have they told them though? That we're only the ones going to heaven because that's, you know,
it could be that,
typical, right?
it could be that, it could be the instruments, it could be that you have to be baptized to be saved.
Could be how we treat women.
Exactly. But again, it doesn't matter, because if I'm trying to reach that person who I'd like to be a part of our congregation, they're going, nope, I don't want any part of that, because I've heard things.
Yep. Real quick, Mr. Ken, you've had your hand up for a while.
It's almost like we fear this name, you know, and this name is a penalty that puts us at a disadvantage.
Well, that's the question that we're asking. Is it a penalty?
But I'm betting that this isn't different than what Jesus and the disciples encountered with the new church is you guys are a cult, you're not Jews, you're not pagan worshipers, you have your own set of rules and beliefs and things like that. I mean, these kinds of burdens of carrying this name have been here from day one.
Right.
This is not new.
So
it evidences itself in a little bit different way. But if you turn the coin over, a question might be, rather than, is the name serving us? Are we serving the name?
Okay.
As a Church of Christ, if someone came in here, or if Jesus came in here today in disguise and said, how are you guys representing my church? What would that look like?
Yeah, right. So to Ken's point is, you know, you've got to imagine that Jesus and his disciples probably had a lot of the same reputation, if you will. They were drastically different than the whole rest of, you know, the God-fearing world at the time. They had their own set of beliefs and the way that they operated, and they were very drastically different. I am eager to hear from Miss Valerie, who probably brings some unique perspective to this conversation.
So I was raised Baptist, and I went to Baptist until when Jason came to my house and said, we're going to have a race, and it's going to start in your driveway. And that was April of 17. 2 weeks later, my husband died. The next Sunday, I was here, and I was hook, line, and sinker. The two things that, like, I've invited 4 people to come today. Don't know if they'll come because they're so turned off by the music. So things that when you are raised Baptist and you go to Baptist, I'm 63 years old. When you go to Baptist for like 56 years and then you come here, the perspective I have is none of the songs are any Baptist songs, any Lutheran songs, any Catholic songs I've ever heard. I've gone to church a long time. And so I've been so welcomed here. I love it. How do I answer those people who say, why don't you have, like, they come, they cry, they love the sermons from Marshall, like hook, line, and sinker. They're sold with Marshall. But they'll go, man, that music just...
Okay, yeah.
So how do we answer them and say, or can we also incorporate a couple of Baptist songs in there? Revive us again, yeah. You know,
So-
I love it, like in Holy, 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 yeah, got it. Because
Okay.
those I've known since, you know, 4th grade. But like, how do I answer them and why are you guys so staunch in not having even a piano?
Okay.
How do I answer that to get, because I, like, every week I'm like, the people, you know, people are like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm here, and they're like, oh, you're going to go today,
So Valerie's point is that, you know, she has a Baptist background and came to attending Flagstone under interesting circumstances, which is awesome. It's a great story. But she's talked to some of her friends about coming here, and it's worship style issues, worship style preferences, and lack of familiarity. So they don't relate to any of the songs that we sing here. Just it's that different than what they're accustomed to in the Baptist or Methodist circles.
what's the reason? Why is there no, if I had a valid reason for them, they'll say, oh, okay.
Well, I'll just be very honest with you. Jordan, you feel free to answer this question. We're totally off topic here. But a lot of those songs don't sound good with a cappella singing. You've got to kind of have that accompaniment going along with it in many cases.
Very true.
Yeah, so...
Next insights class that we're going to
No, not right now. Let's don't get started down that path. Real quick, Hannah, you have something here?
I'm wondering if the point we're getting to with all the comments about like what's in a name and how do I tell my friend, Is it man-made or is it God-made?
The name of the church.
Is the name man-made, or if we're serving the church, well, the church is all of us.
That's right.
It's not a building, it's not a name on the front of the church.
That's right.
It's a name for the body of people worshiping God. And so at what point are we trying to say, is this name helping us or hurting us from attracting more people to God? And as long as we are serving what's in the Bible,
Right.
does the rest of it really matter?
Yes, I think that's a good point. So I think we answered the question last week, is this name given to us by God? I think we answered that effectively last week. And then, so then the question is, I'm going to paraphrase, you hold me on, keep me honest here. Are we being stubborn and holding on to it if it's a deterrent? Okay, well, we'll see. We're trying to answer that question.
It was not the Church of Christ, it was
That's
the
right.
body of Christ.
It was the body of Christ that got Valerie here, and I think that's important. It was the reaching out and the connecting part of what we do
Well, and
here.
they didn't put any pressure on me
That's
that
right.
they were going to show up at my house every week.
That's right. That's right.
I don't think they'll do that to you.
Okay, Chris has had his hand up for a while.
No, that's okay. I want to piggyback on my story. The gentleman and I had that discussion, and as we started going through our beliefs, he discovered that our beliefs were incredibly in line with his. There were very few differences, and most of them revolved around how we perform our worship. They completely fall in line with baptism. They completely fall in line with believing that the Word of God that the Bible is the Word of God, that's God breathed. And it was kind of an eye opener for him in that so you guys are just like us, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
We still don't have musical instruments, but we also believe that baptism is a necessity for salvation.
Yeah. So Chris is saying, really, if you can get past some of those surface level deterrents that people, encounter sometimes, we often have a whole lot that we share in common with the various other Christian fellowships. We do want to cover a couple other things, but if somebody's super eager and really has something powerful to say, yes, ma'am.
One of my daughter goes to Grace Point, the other goes to Fellowship.
Okay.
We've compared things. The only difference is
Grace Point and Fellowship. So she has daughters that attend Grace Point and Fellowship, and they've really dug in and talked through it, and really it's the worship style. That is the key difference there between those churches. Okay, Jake,
We have to realize no matter what we call ourselves, we as humans love to label things. And if you're reaching non-church people, they don't have the baggage or whatever, so they're not really trying to maybe label it as much as others who have a background. I mean, they're going to label it. They're going to be like, oh, so it's like this or it's like that, right? And that's going to happen. But
Yeah. So even regardless of what we do with the name, that we're going to be associated with something. They're going to figure it out themselves. Okay. Let's move on, and then maybe at the end, if there's other general comments that we want to make, we can definitely allow time for that. So I want to kind of group it and approach it like this. So are there benefits to being associated with a common name? We've talked about some of those already, so I just kind of want to check some of these off. So it does help with, in most cases, kind of helps general understanding of what to expect with a worship style. Okay, so if you already have familiarity with a church name, you probably know for the most part, what it's going to be like when you walk in those doors. So if someone's trying to find a church and they have some understanding of the different church types, probably going to have a general understanding of what it's going to look like inside. Like we talked about already, it does typically help shape up or frame up the core beliefs. Again, churches other than Church of Christ often have a creed, and sometimes it's even posted on their websites these days and things like that. So it really kind of helps quickly identify. It's really what Jake was saying. It's a label that helps you understand commonality in this group of believers. And then for many people, especially if you have an upbringing in a church, it can provide a sense of familiarity. So think about when you're traveling. What are you going to most likely do? You're going to go find the nearest Church of Christ. A little side note. I get nervous when I'm in a different town and I see a Church of Christ. I don't know. I have to go research first. I mean, I I don't know. I get worried sometimes about what that may be when I walk in those doors. And so our family, we're going to do a little bit of research first. We ended up in one in Colorado one time outside of Denver. Everybody could bring their own instruments into the service. So they did not have a band. They did not have a praise team, but we had people with egg shakers and tambourines and bongo drums out in the audience. And they were praising Jesus with those instruments, and it was really interesting. Okay, so that was kind of the maybe benefits of understanding being associated with a common name. Okay, and we've talked a little bit about some of the negatives or risks with also being a part of a common name, but I want to share a few others maybe real quick. So one thing is you don't have control over how others may use that name. And there's a liability out there with that. And so you think about things that could hit the headlines, things that have hit the headlines with some churches. There were a couple that immediately came to mind as I started going down this path. How many of you are familiar with the Hillsong Church? And I hate that we're doing this on video.
There's a bunch of hands.
It is what it is. This is out there. I'm not throwing stones at anybody. Things are things that just happen, okay? So the Hillsong Church, I think, started in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, and then it spread. It became a massive church. It really took on in the United States. They have praise and worship songs that some of us listen to quite a bit, or maybe did, but they had a major scandal in their body in the U.S. and a very prominent, one of their rock star top ministers or pastors had a major issue, went really big, it caught on like wildfire and hit the headlines, and that church just all but basically dissolved in the United States because of that. So that's the liability that I'm talking about, where something happens in one of the congregations that has that name or that label associated with it, and it's immediately attributed to, well, that goes on everywhere. That's how they all think. That's probably what's happening in that one, down the block from our house too. And so that's something we just have to acknowledge and be aware of. You think about there's a lot going on in the United Methodist Church right now, and I know in Fayetteville especially, and so it makes you wonder, okay, well then, what do these people all believe these certain ways, and so it's just something to think about, it's an association when you have a common name. Okay, here's another one, and I'm going to go off script a little bit, Marshall. I came up with this yesterday in some continued research. There's actually some variations of the Churches of Christ, and some of you who are more familiar and have dug into this, some may be aware of this. So there is a body called the United Churches of Christ, and they do kind of have more of a governing structure associated with that network of churches, and they're very political, okay? And you might see them in the headlines sometimes. If I'm not mistaken, Barack Obama was a proclaimed United Church of Christ member. And if you do a search for that organization, they are basically have become known for their fighting in governments and filing lawsuits to protect same-sex marriage. Okay, so they've taken on some states that have attempted to ban it, and that church is associated with those lawsuits. Okay, so that's the United Churches of Christ. There's another International Churches of Christ, which is also a prominent body. If you do a search on it, there's a lot on it. Unfortunately, this is one that does tend to get associated with cult behavior, and I'm just saying what it is. If you do searches for that particular church, there's a lot of how in Google you do a search and you get common other searches similar to this, and there's a whole lot around that that comes up. And I'm not saying that it is at all. I'm just saying people ask that question for whatever reason. And then they've had some scandals as well that you'll find if you do some research. So I'm just saying, and common people, even common Christian people, may not understand that there's any differences between those bodies and those names and those groupings with ours. They may just group it all together when they're trying to do some research. And so again, and there's common stigmas, and I'm going to tell you there's common stigmas associated with probably every Christian church out there, but we have our own that are somewhat unique to some of the other ones. Okay, we've already talked about what questions or comments we often encounter when sharing with others. We had quite a number of hands raised when I asked the question, have you all encountered that type of end of conversation whenever you say that you're attending a Church of Christ. I just want to share a quick story of myself real quick, and then we've got kind of a closeout topic. I had a situation not too long ago. So at our office, my employer, we're very encouraged to live out our faith in the workplace, which I'm very appreciative of that. And so we talk. It's common conversation. We talk about our faith, and we're pretty open, and we share with each other. And I had a lady that I work with who I think is a wonderful person. We were traveling one day, and she said, Jeremy, tell me about your church. I've been attending a local church. It's too big for me. I don't feel like I can get plugged in. I am a servant. I want to work. I want to get plugged in. I want to be at the heart of what's going on at a church. I was like, thank you. Come to Flag. I want you to come to Flagstone. Check it out. And I had one of my Flagstone cards, and I was like, take this with you. And I hate to say it. It's actually hard for me to talk about. The minute she saw that it was a Church of Christ, the conversation ended. And it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I know for a fact, because I've worked with her long enough, that she would love this congregation. She would love you all. She would love serving here. She would love the programs that we have. She would be in the children's ministry every Sunday. I just know that. And because she had an experience when she was younger, related to her family, she would not continue the conversation, and that's hard. That's hard to encounter that. But we have to keep going, right? We have to keep going. Okay. So we are kind of getting close to the end of our time. So let's ask this question. Yes, Chris.
The thing that we have to remember is we are charged with sharing what God has done for us, our story, right? And that's to plant that seed. We have to understand that we're not going to win every person. We can't. Yep. What did Jesus say when he was talking about the town that they tried to go to that wouldn't plant? He said, "Dust, wipe the dust of that town off your feet and move on to the next one." And I'm not saying that to be harsh, but I'm saying that to help us to understand that we cannot be everything to every person. What we have to do is what we think is best for this congregation. Yep. And I hate that she had that reaction. I've seen it too. I've seen that, and it's hard to take that because they're assuming that you are just like whatever bad experience they had that caused them to have that reaction. And you would hope that over time she would give it an opportunity. I mean, she knows you well enough to have asked the question. So
Chris says, we're not going to win everybody. In fact, and I would take it one step further. Even if we do get them here, to Valerie's point, they may not like it. I mean, they may not align with their own personal preferences. So we're not going to get everyone, and we just have to keep going. We have to keep talking to others. So let's go back to our original question, okay? And let's dive into that and dissect that in just a minute. Do we believe that the name of Church of Christ is helping or hindering our mission of reaching out, connecting, and serving? So we're just going to go through it one by one, okay? Does it hinder us? Does the name in any way hinder us from reaching out?
It shouldn't.
It shouldn't, but I've gotten some yeses, okay? Maybe it's embarrassment, I don't know. But anyway, it shouldn't. We should be willing to go out there and talk to others about Christ, okay? And invite them to this body, and for whatever reason, if to the point that we were just saying, if we don't get them, if they're not going to attend here, we should still encourage them to pursue their faith, right? And to at least study the Bible, find a body to associate with that they are most comfortable with as long as it's in good alignment with the Word. Okay, we'll do one quick comment. David?
I was going to say, a lot of the stuff we've talked about, we changed our name, went non-denominational. A lot of those questions will come. Like,
yes.
Do we have music? Do we not? What is the women's role in the church? I mean, I've got a lot of non-denominational friends. And so that's a lot of the same questions. However, to Jordan's point, maybe you get farther down the path in the conversation before you find that stuff out.
Yeah.
But with that, if you look at the numbers, non-denominational seems to be what is expanding, largely.
Right.
However, a lot of the people I meet that are new here have a Church of Christ background. And so we have to convert these conversations that we're having, because we may not get those Church of Christ folks that look online and come find us. We have to convert these people that we're talking to out there into the door if we ever hope to get to the 600, you know, just looking at the numbers.
That's right.
And so something to really think about is we really will have to begin spreading the word, maybe even more than we are now.
There is a point I want to make, and I plan to kind of close up with this here in just a minute, but the point that David made was there are actually benefits in being associated with the name too, because if you don't have the name associated with your church, people don't have any idea what to expect, right? And so it's a very ambiguous thing at that point. So there's ways to address that too. Real quick, does the name of the Church of Christ specifically, does it impact our ability to serve? I wouldn't think so. It shouldn't. So reach out. I mean, it shouldn't impact our ability to reach out, at least engage people, right? It shouldn't impact, really positive or negative, in our ability to serve. I notice I skipped over connect. What about connect? Is it impacting our ability to connect? That's the question, and that's the question that we're really trying to understand, and that's all. We're seeking, yes.
I mean, it takes you having a conversation with somebody to make that connection. And when you hit that resistance, there are going to be times where they're going to go, I don't even want to talk to you. But then there's going to be times where you'll have a conversation like I did with that guy, and we'll come to a common understanding. Now, our goal is to grow the kingdom. I know that we want to be 600, but okay, that's a great goal. I don't think that means that we're really trying to grow just numbers. Right? We want to grow the kingdom, and so for every 5 people that we bring to the kingdom of God, we might get one of those that comes to Flagstaff. So I think that's one of the things we need to understand about the focus of why we're wanting to grow. It's not about making Flagstaff this great place that's huge.
Right.
Our job is to grow the kingdom.
These questions are hard to answer because what's the stigma on the other side without the name?
Right, yeah.
And what are the problems that creates? And what barriers does that create for us? And maybe we're going to answer that next week, but I think that's the other side. Like, the grass may not be greener on the other side.
Good point.
It may be even a harder conversation of where the Calvary Church or something like that. So, I mean, there's a Calvary Church and there's multiple Calvary churches.
Right around the corner, absolutely, yeah. Okay, we're pretty much running out of time. Morgan, I do want to hear what you had to say.
So, where I work, no one talks about their faith or their church or anything. I work with, in healthcare, everyone has some sort of trauma somehow. I don't know how we all find each other and we decide to be friends, but I can tell you right now that whenever I talk about my church, they are never going to ask me, what is your worship style? Do you use instruments? What are your women's roles? They're going to ask me, how are you going to make me feel when I walk in the door? And are the people at your church
Are they hypocritical?
That is, right now, our culture is looking for a place to belong. It's not as much, do I align with your beliefs? Because most of them don't really know. If you're talking about real unchurched people, how many times are they really up to date on what they think the Bible tells us about worship or leadership or anything? What they want to know is, are you real Christian people? Are you going to accept me? Are you going to love me?
Okay.
And so I think that sometimes when they hear Church of Christ, they don't hear, oh, well, this is your worship style. They hear, you're exclusive. And that's the biggest turnoff more than anything for unchurched is the culture.
Yeah, I think that's very good, Morgan. Yeah, so really, especially in the younger generations these days, they're looking for a belonging, in a body. They're looking for a knowledge of Christ and things like that. So we're going to wrap up. We're pretty much out of time.
Just tell everybody what's going to happen next week.
Yeah, so next week is going to kind of be a similar probably to this. So it'll be kind of wrapping up. One thing I think we need to focus on is the unchurched. What are they seeing? If we're inviting them in, what is it that they're going to see as they start doing, they're going to be on their phones. They're going to be on Google. There's YouTube videos out there. There's Wikipedia pages out there. That's the kind of stuff that they'll probably hit first when we invite somebody in, when they really research they're going to come to our website, they're going to look at our social media, and they're going to look at some broader material on Churches of Christ. Excellent participation. Thank you all for that. Marshall, any closing thoughts?
Come back next week.
Come back next week. Appreciate all the engagement this morning. This is exactly what we hoped it would be this morning. Thank you.